All right, welcome back to another episode of the Apparatus Workshop podcast on fire apparatus emergency equipment. Today we're talking about tiller trucks. This is part two. Today we're going to dive into training and operations, more so than getting the tiller truck into your respective response area. We are joined with two guests. We have Tim Curran from Baltimore City Fire Department and John Morris as well from the Baltimore City Fire Department. As always, myself, Nick Wilbur, and Win Slauch. And we're going to kind of dive right in. We're going to let Tim introduce himself first, and then John give a little bit of their background, and then we'll get kind of right into the operations and training side. So, Tim.
All right, so Tim Curran, longtime listener, first-time podcaster. Grew up just outside of New York City in New Jersey. Was a firefighter there about 17 years ago. Moved into College Park, Maryland. Lived in there for just shy of 6 years. Got approved to be a master driver there so I could drive everything. Got hired by Montgomery County just outside of D.C. Worked there just long enough to get out of the academy, and I got the call from Baltimore City. Went up to Baltimore City in 2014. Out of the academy, I got assigned to Truck 16. Proved to tiller and drive right around 2016, 2017. And in 2019, I got promoted to emergency vehicle driver, or as we refer to them as EVDs. Went to 21 Truck in Brooklyn for just shy of 2 years, and I've been back at Truck 16 since early 2020. And currently, all I do during my shift is I either drive the front end of a tractor drawn aerial or a tiller, and that's strictly what I do during my shift. Work sometimes with Johnny Moe, who's on here. He's a Pigtown boy, so I'll let him introduce himself to you.
Hi, everybody. Like Tim, I too am a first-time podcaster. Like Tim, I too am also an emergency vehicle driver in the Baltimore City Fire Department. I've been in the fire service since I was 14. I got hired in the city of Baltimore in 2011. I unfortunately went to an engine company, but quickly transferred to a truck company when I was eligible. I got there too, like Tim, I got approved to drive and tiller. And then in the beginning of 2017, I made EVD. I went to Truck Company 12. I did about 2 years there, and then transferred to Truck 23 in Pigtown, which I'm very proud of. We got a great house. I love it. I also have some experience as part-timer in the city of Coatesville. I got hired there back in 2014, and they too have a tiller truck that I get to drive and tiller quite often.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think that's going to be an important kind of thing to draw from today, and we kind of talk about the tiller trucks and some of the operational stuff. So that's awesome. All right, so I guess we'll start off. I'll kick it to you, Tim, first. Like, when you think about tiller truck, I know we started together at College Park, going from the straight truck and then going to Baltimore City where you have the tiller truck. Just operationally, mindset, things like that. Just very open-ended question. How are they different? Like, what would you say in your words, like operationally, driving, thought process, mindset? Just kind of what are some things that somebody should take away from when you start talking about a tiller truck and its operation?
Yeah, so like you said, in College Park, we had a rear-mounted straight stick. Moving on to the tiller truck, I know we always joked in PG County that bendy trucks, they beat the straight trucks, and truthfully, they do. They are just more dynamic. Turns are so much easier. You can fit them into places that you normally couldn't with a straight truck, which is very interesting considering that our truck now that we have at Truck 16 is about just shy of 57 feet long. And the reserve truck that we just went into is right around 40 feet. And you would think that a smaller truck is easier to move around a city, but it's not. We have cars parked on both sides of the street. We have bike lanes that make things difficult. During COVID, a lot of jurisdictions, I'm sure, started seeing, especially in the cities, that they started building these outdoor patios and seating areas, which really make things hard to navigate around. But just having a tractor drawn aerial, man, the places that you can get that thing that you never thought you could get a truck into is unbelievable. We don't leave the street that often in Baltimore just because, a lot of stuff's paved and we have alleys. that are set up and paved and have concrete on them, so it makes it easier to get to. But stuff we've seen in PG County, where some of those truck companies around us that are tiller trucks, places that they've got those in garden style apartments, is quite unbelievable. So it really is a dynamic truck. It's once you get to drive and operate it and see what it can actually do, it changes your mind completely about the piece of equipment you're operating.
John, anything to add on that?
Yeah, just to back up Tim a little bit, when I drive a straight truck as opposed to when I'm driving a tiller truck, I truthfully feel like I can be way more aggressive with my positioning in the tiller truck. Not only because, of its capabilities to get where you want to put it, but with the Tillerman, we're putting the brain power of two drivers together now to kind of bounce ideas off each other on your spot and where you're going to put your truck. And, when you have a good partner, when you combine those two brain powers and that aggressive attitude, you can, like Tim said, you can put that thing in places that people are taking pictures. People are, coming up, giving you high fives. Like, I don't know how you guys did that, but that's awesome. And in Coatesville, we are unique in the way that we have very rural area as opposed to, an urban area. And so there's driveways that you could never make a turn into with a straight truck. That now with a tiller truck, you can whip right into it and pull right down in, behind your first two engine and throw that stick right over the cab. It keeps your truck in the game quickly. So yeah, I love them. I can't preach them enough.
I think one thing, that I've always kind of questioned, I've seen it, again, not a tiller truck operator or driver, question to kind of throw out, whoever wants to answer it first. When, this time of year now, we talk about the winter time. I just remember a couple of times we had a good snowstorm or ice storm, with the straight truck not having to chain it up or anything like that. What do you guys think about with the weather or topography changes or anything like that? Is there more things to kind of consider with that in their operation and driving? Or I guess, what are your considerations in the wintertime would be a better question.
I'll go next.
Yeah, you got that one, Johnny. I'll follow up.
All right. So, obviously, yes. Your weight on the fifth wheel area of a tiller truck is truthfully not all that much. So, do you need to put chains on a tiller truck sooner than you would a straight truck? The answer, in my opinion, would be yes. With that being said, and Tim can attest to this, in a lot of cities, when you first get your snowstorm, all of your intersections are perfect crosses. So when you are in your straight truck, trying to make your turns is rather difficult, right? So with your tiller truck, I can basically work my tractor down my cross street and then pull my trailer through. But as far as the chain thing, once they're chained, they're usually off to the races. They do pretty well. But at the end of the day, wintertime just stinks, man.
Yeah. We're talking ahead. You work on you're going to be working after the snowstorm coming up too, so you might get a first-hand account with the chains back on. They were doing that this morning.
I've worked those back-to-back storms in 2014. They were stressful. I mean, at the end of the day, you're driving a $2 million, $3 million piece of equipment in the snow. It's your knuckles are a little white, man.
Yeah, especially Hillary, if you start to slide, it's hard to control that rear steer. But
truth, I've been there too.
Yeah, you still like I said, even if you have wide open intersections like you're talking about, and then you get snow packed on the corners, and if the plow comes through, depending on how they push that snow, how they felt at the moment when they were doing it, it's really going to restrict your access on that street. And we see it. The vast majority of the trucks in Baltimore, I think all except 3 trucks are tiller trucks, so it makes life a lot easier getting down those streets. If we're doing it on a medic run, I'm not trying to get down that street. I'll stay. We can hike it. I'm not risking it. But, lives are on the line. You get a dwelling or 2 off, and you got to get that truck down there. I'll take that risk of bumping into a couple cars if I have to, getting that tiller truck down there. But I know in certain circumstances that we've had some straight trucks that just can't make the turns, even just, on a normal clear day. But I've definitely seen a lot of these tiller trucks be able to make the street. You're definitely slowing down, right? Trying to consider what you have, right? Keep that traction when you can. Don't stop, but slow down. Keep that traction and make your way up as best you can. Um, but yeah, it could be a difficult situation, but as long as you've trained on it, like as long as you're out there in the snow when it's prior to that dwelling fire coming out and understanding how your vehicle changes and how you operate it in the snow, then you shouldn't really have too many issues.
Yeah, this is something that I can actually add to is, when you're specking your apparatus, especially a tiller truck, and depending on the manufacturer, you need to have that thought process in. It's whatever you're going to do in the winter, because there are certain manufacturers that build their wheel wells different based on whether you tell them you're going to put manual chains on it versus on spots or nothing at all. And if you don't tell them you're going to put manual chains on it and then go to do it and they didn't build your wheel wells right, then there's not enough space in the wheel wells in order for you to put the manual chains on there. So again, from my side of things, this is where that comes into play, that you have to think about those procedures down the road. I think you guys mentioned something there that, again, this kind of podcast was supposed to be on training and kind of how you get there. But you talked about how do you anticipate that losing that traction? Is there a way to train for that? The first time you lose traction is when you're trying to figure out how to turn the wheels on the tiller to keep it in line. You guys, is there any training process in the driving?
I think it's like as you drive more often, and you can definitely tell when things aren't right with your vehicle, right? We had it the other day, our steering was loose, and then next thing you know, we had a full rotation with the wheel, and lo and behold, we climb underneath, and the whole power steering box was separated from the chassis. Like all the bolts were pretty much missing except for one, and but the time and experience behind the wheel, the driver knew something wasn't right, right? So similar situation with the weather. Your first time again in the snow shouldn't be going down that street when the house is on fire, right? You get any type of snow and you have an inexperienced driver, or just a driver, could have a couple of years, and especially down, below the Mason-Dixon line where some of us are. It doesn't snow that often, but when it does snow, it's an issue for normal cars, right? So getting out there for any type of snow accumulation as a driver is good, just to refamiliarize yourself with it. So when you do have to make that tight street, you're going down the road with reports of people trapped, like it's still in the back of your mind, like I've operated this thing, in adverse weather before, and I can recognize hopefully before something happens or anticipate something that's going to happen just based off of that experience.
Yeah, and for you guys, I'm sure, call volume wise, you guys are out in that weather all the time. But for those, maybe in Coatesville where you're not, like maybe that's, or, another small department where you're not out in it every day running, medical calls and fire alarms, is that maybe you get out one of those days where you say, hey, we're going to go in here and we're just going to hang out. And, we're here if we get a call or whatever.
Sure.
Again, you work for a department that doesn't run 25,000 calls per tiller truck a year. You got to make yourself go out in those days. Same with the rain. It's pouring down rain. You want to get out and drive in that too. So
it's where the Chiefs come in. Like when guys say, hey, we want to go out and drive in this, the Chiefs sometimes would say, hey, they're so afraid of an accident or something, they're kind of holding the guys up. But these are good opportunities. Like Tim said, I'd rather get the guys time behind the wheel, just driving slow and kind of letting the truck slide, getting a feel for it with no emergency. Next thing you know, you're like you said, you're going to a fire, and all of a sudden it's their first time. If we can get those reps in, going to the store, just going out driving around carefully, we'd be foolish not to.
I think for one thing too, like, I've always kind of wondered this, and I think this is a great time to kind of explore this question. But, the two driver thing, I mean, there's a lot of, goods and bads with that, right? But how important is it that, you're cool with each other, that you're on the same page, you're familiar, or, does it matter that one's experienced and one's not? What would be the preference if you have a more experienced driver than the front and the back? Can someone be good at one and not the other, right? Like what, all of that stuff, right? Like, it kind of goes into the training side of things, but I think it's important for people to understand and know, because, one thing we always talk about with fire trucks is staffing. Like, who's going to ride this thing? And before we even cut any sort of spec or sheet of paper, we want to understand how many, who, what the requirements are going to be and training implications of a rig. We're going to go out there and spend $2 million to $3 million on a tiller truck, for the next 20 years possibly, or longer. And, are we going to be able to sustain that? Is it a good idea? Year 3, this thing backfires. That's not something that is good. So I guess kind of jump into that. And John, if you want to take that question, since you kind of can go to both sides of that career and volunteer-ish land, part-time land.
Yeah, I mean, part-time land is interesting because it's there's a handful of full-timers, and then they're constantly working with part-timers. So Coatesville's unique because like a lot of departments, they never had a tiller truck. So when they got one, there was 24 people on staff that had never tilled. And they'd all driven a straight truck, they'd all operated a straight truck, but now all of a sudden we're putting them behind the wheel of a tiller truck, right? So we started their training with tillering, getting all the guys comfortable, familiar, confident. That was my biggest thing. Sure, you can meet the parameters that we'd set up that, hey, I want you to be able to do this, this, and this. But at the end of the day, like, I needed that operator to be confident in his abilities. And even if he met the parameters or she had met the parameters, but they weren't confident, then hey, we're gonna keep hammering reps here until you're confident. And then from there, and Baltimore does the same way. You start as a tillerman. Firefighters get to prove a tiller first. From there, we move them up to drive, which I think helps because you have in your mind, I know how to tiller now. So now that I know how to tiller, I can see what a good driver is and what a bad driver is. And I think it ultimately helps make you a better driver. With that being said, some guys are truthfully, they're just better tillermen. There's some guys that are better drivers. Baltimore is unique because the captains let a lot of them, the drivers, do what they want. And what I mean by that is like my partner and I, for example, first day he drives, I tiller. Second day we switch. Some firehouses, they do month to month. Some firehouses, the senior EVD always drives, the junior always tillers. And when that junior guy is driving for the first time in a long time, it's noticeable. It's noticeable, right? They're just not quite getting the reps that they normally would be if they were working a different way. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to try and get time behind both wheels. I think it ultimately makes you better in both positions. I think Tim would probably agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I always kind of equate it back, like, in PG County, in Baltimore, I hate to say it, we had to ride the medic unit, right? I'm ALS, so when I was in the back the majority of the time. I was never really driving that much. And you could definitely tell the person driving the ambulance itself didn't take into account, like, what you had to do in the back. And you can definitely tell, like, the more experience you get in the back there, you become a better driver and understand what needs to get done in the back. So I think the same thing applies to a tiller truck. Is you don't want to put your tillerman in a bad situation if you're driving, right? And you want to anticipate your turns if you're tillering based off of what the driver is going to do. I like having a consistent partner. I know you do, Johnny. Like, it makes life a lot easier. When they take off, you're like, why'd you have to take your vacation today, right? You never know who you're going to get to drive. It could be the junior guy in the company who you know, or it could just be some random person from the other side of the city who you've never worked with before. Now you're starting to really consider going down the road, what can they and can't they do? And I know with the junior guys in the firehouse, the guys that just get approved tiller, and even just backing into the firehouse, man, I'm going a lot slower and looking in my mirrors a lot more, just considering, like, I know they've done it. I helped train them, but still I got to anticipate, like, it's been a while. They might have been on, detail train for the last month and haven't tillered anywhere. So it definitely changes your mindset. Having a consistent partner is probably the best thing that we have going for us. And unlike Johnny, at our station, we switch month to month. So I just finished driving in December, and I'm tillering this month. And that way we get into a routine and, continuously get that exposure throughout the month, and then we'll switch. But it's not the same in our firehouse either. There's some guys that just drive all the time, other guys that drive, every other day. So obviously it just depends on what your preference is in your firehouse.
And I don't want it to I don't want to scare people. Like in Coachville, they were worried that they weren't always going to have partners. Yeah, I mean, I will attest all day long. My partner and I, we gel very well. We work extremely well together, and it is nice. It is so nice having a partner. But that's not to say that Tim doesn't pick up overtime and has to go tiller behind someone he's never tiller behind. Yes, and he's not going to have the cohesion that he has with his normal partner, but they will get the job there. They'll work together. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's not like the job can't be done. And so Coatesville, I think, kind of picked up on that. Like, yeah, having a consistent partner is cool. It really is. It's a perk. But if you have detail guys, you're just changing your mindset a little bit. And eventually, you work with enough people that, okay, this day I know I'm following this guy. I'm going to be tillering a little more than if I was following Tim, maybe, who's driving it more like a tractor trailer. But it's all 100% doable and shouldn't be like a deterrent if you're worried about crews constantly changing. It's just it may not have the quite flow that two partners would have. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So I think even going off of that, it really stems back to what is your driver training process to be approved, right? So when we first started, and even back like when we first got promoted or approved to drive and tiller, the process has changed since then. I think people started picking up on there were some issues, so let's change this. Because I remember when you went out there, you went out for your initial tiller training. The person approving you might not even be or have been approved to tiller, which was funny because they were just assigned to the fire academy. Here's your approval, right? Which just blows my mind now looking at it and working on the outside in doing training and going around the country and teaching. Like that shouldn't happen. You can't have somebody approve you to do something that they're not approved to do themselves. And then I think they started picking up on that. So now they tried to standardize the process a little bit more. You'll go out for your initial tiller training. You'll do your cone course. You come back to your company and you start doing your drive time. And those guys work with you and train you. And when you get to a certain point and those guys feel comfortable, girls feel comfortable, then they send you back to the academy and they have a whole test out procedure for you to go through. When back in the day, it used to be, and by back in the day, it's only like 5-6 years ago, you would do your training in-house and then your captain would give you the stamp of approval. They would just send your approval up the chain and then telestaff would approve you and show that you're a driver. Which, things can get hairy there because who knows who's actually doing your final sign-off. Was it a captain who just so happened to become a captain of a truck company who was an engine guy their entire career, not even approved to tiller themselves, which could have been very possible, right? Somebody that just never tillered for the last 20 plus years. They've been a captain that long. You just never know. So we still have issues. I know those guys down at the academy, Johnny's partner, he's very active in the academy and they're starting a process to hopefully get like a true EVD school going. To just, help those guys and girls that are getting their approvals and, help them with the process. But like I said, it all comes back to your driver training process. So now, even though somebody I'm not comfortable with is tillering behind me or I have to tiller behind somebody driving, I know they went through the same process that we did and the same sign-offs that I had to do. And you feel a little more comfortable in that side of it.
So your initial, even as a firefighter, your initial training on the tiller is at the academy?
Yeah.
So it's not done in-house?
Your initial sign-off, you have to get the approval to go down. So you can't do it until you have 18 months in the department. Then you ask your captain or your officer, and they push it up to your captain, and they send out the word to the fire academy, and you set up a date and you go out there. You navigate through a cone course. Hopefully you have a good driver there with you who will spend a little extra time and stay at the academy and go over stuff with you before you leave. And then at that point, you're approved to tiller non-emergency. So a lot of guys will do it back from runs to build up their time and their hours. And then again, depending on the company that you're in, you're going to go out and you're going to, constantly drive and train and size up buildings, set up the aerial, all that good stuff. I don't know if you have any more of that.
Talk to that. As you guys as firefighters or EVDs, not company officers, how do you guys, what's your process for teaching that new tillerman or even a new, if he's driving the front for the first time, what's your process on teaching that for these guys? Like, how do you go about getting the finer points of being a tillerman or even driving in front of us to these guys.
I guess too, a time frame too, right? So like how long, right? So like today, I'm coming in, I've never tillered or anything before. I come into the firehouse and I want to start this process. Like, what's a reasonable expectation? This will be helpful for people, I think, getting a new tiller truck. Like, what's the expectation for somebody to be nothing to a tillerman, and then a tillerman to driving the truck? What's like hour wise and thought process wise there?
So no, we don't have any set hours. It depends on the company, right? How determined they are to get you out, and also how motivated that driver trainer is, right? Constantly getting behind the wheel. We do have a lot of things that cause issues. Guys getting detailed to other companies, getting detailed to the medic, which makes it hard, to constantly be driver training with them. But like I said, it really, in Baltimore, it depends on the company and just your exposure out on the street. I know my company, not Johnny's, but we are pretty busy. We're constantly out on the street running assignments. We're sizing up buildings on medic runs. We're sizing up buildings differently on, dwelling fires that we take. And obviously the exposure with the dwelling fires, like Baltimore has a pretty decent workload. Those are the good times where you're able to like truly get out and show guys when you show up on a dwelling fire, like, this is what I was thinking. What are your thoughts on this? What would you have done differently? You can accept the criticism too, just as much as a driver versus what you can give as a trainer. So,
John, what like at Coatesville, or for any, I guess, smaller department, if you have a new part-timer come in, and what's the training process look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a lot of it depends on the person. Some people pick it up faster than others. It's the truth. I was a little slower personally. Once the wires finally connected, I was off to the races. But props to Jason Schultz and Christian Haynes for hanging in there with me and helping me get those wires to connect. With Coatesville, I took guys that have been driving apparatus longer than I've been alive, and some of them really struggled to get the wires to connect. Other people, they picked it up immediately. So I think, obviously the guys that it wasn't quite clicking right away, they're going to take some more time. They're going to need more reps. Other people where, hey, it lined up. I got this. They're demonstrating it. They feel comfortable. Then they're going to progress a little faster. But the people that need more reps, that's like Tim said, that's what it comes down to is just getting behind the wheel and getting repetition. I always use this analogy. When you pull into the convenience store to get your coffee in the morning, you know where the front end of your car is. You know where the Ballard is, so you don't slam into the Ballard every time. How did you get that? Because you pull into that convenience store every morning to get your coffee. You get a feel for the front end of your car. Just like tillering, the more I tiller, the better I get a feel for this entire operation. And so reps are massive. Everyone, though, starts, for me personally, in a parking lot. There's nothing that makes someone feel worse than hitting something. Crushing a cone in a parking lot is not a big deal. Crushing a car or a telephone pole is really going to, it's going to be a shot to the organization, and it's going to be a shot to that operator, right? They're going to be a real gut punch. So when you start showing proficiency in a parking lot with cones, then sweet, let's hit the streets. But we hit them slow. We're not ripping through turns. We're not setting these guys up for failure. We're helping build that muscle memory. We're helping build that confidence, and then speed and everything will progress. I think Tim would agree. And then again, like I think I said this earlier, I'm not a mind reader, right? I know when in my mirror as the driver that you look good. You're not oversteering. Your turns are on point. I know when I think you're ready, but at the end of the day, like you know when you're ready as far as I feel good back here, or no, I'm not comfortable and confident. I need more reps. I need more time.
Has there ever been a time? So this is like kind of a two-part thing. Has there ever been a time that somebody didn't make it, that they're just not going to be a tiller person, that no matter how much time they take, and again, I don't think this is necessarily specifically a tiller question, because I know plenty of people in the organizations I've been a part of that shouldn't be drivers, that don't want to be drivers, that don't have that right in them, whatever that it is, they don't have it to be a driver. Whether it's emotionally, intellectually, whatever it is that is their issue. Have you guys seen that with tailoring and driving? And would that be a higher rate than you would normally see for just other vehicles? Like, is there some sort of like high fail rate? Is this like the Navy SEALs of the fire department, or is this just like another driving experience that maybe takes a little bit more time, but it's just like another fire truck? How would you kind of describe that?
I don't know if I've had the experience yet with anybody who's been told no. We kind of have a thing, and I hope it kind of changes as we have this like mindset where we work that, I mean, if you aren't going to get approved to do this, you're kind of, for lack of better words, like a bum, man. Like, but in my mind, like I said, and we've done this with EVR and going out and driver training, like this job itself is meant or is open to everyone, but it's not meant for everyone. And the same thing goes with driving. Like, it's not a bad thing if you can't drive. You just can't do it. You don't want to do it, right? Because as we've seen across the country, like, and if you're aware of it and you follow like our website or you follow, fire engineering, whatever it is, you see that there's plenty of accidents around the country. And then when you dive deep into it, you realize that the person didn't want to drive. There's documentation saying that they shouldn't have been driving, that they lack the capabilities or the right mindset to drive. So I know it could set up failure for you and your department by just pushing somebody along in the process who deep down shouldn't do it, and they don't feel comfortable doing it. It's just a recipe for disaster, right? Now, there are people that you can work with, right? Sometimes they just lack the confidence that you can work with them. But I think the more experience you get and the more time you do this, you can kind of see like this person just isn't meant to do this job. But we can find something else that they're better at, right? Or help them work in if they really want to do it, we can work with them, but it's just going to take more time. And the right.
So you're going to go to the engine?
What's that?
They need to go to the engine.
Yeah.
You go to the back of the rescue squad.
Yeah, the back of the rescue squad.
Yeah, send them to the rescue.
Yeah.
John, do you feel the same way with that? I mean, obviously you have the dual perspectives there, and you said that no one's really failed out. And, again, compared to the rest of the fire service, the other jobs of the fire service, any difference there, do you think, for failure rate?
No, I mean, I agree with Tim. We've taken kids from the city that have literally probably maybe never even really driven a car or don't have a ton of time behind the wheel of a car and made them tillermen and good tillermen. I think Tim can attest to that, right? I mean, but the mindset thing is huge. I can't stress that part enough. There's a whole mental aspect to this. It's not, at the end of the day, you're driving a, however many ton piece of fire apparatus at however many miles an hour down the road going to, a building fire, people trapped. And at that point, your piece of apparatus could eventually become a weapon. You're flying, right? So there's a whole mental aspect of, I need to get my truck there quickly, aggressively, but safely, and in one piece at the same time. There are people that I see that I think lack that part. Sure, they might be able to drive it, but when that gong comes off, the gong drops, they essentially black out and they're an absolute disaster. And we don't need that driving or want that driving.
And again, it comes back to your driver training, right? Making sure those drivers are aware, like, this thing is taller, wider, longer, and a lot heavier than even the biggest vehicle that some of these people drive, right? Like you said, we don't want this thing to become a weapon. And you see it day in and day out through the fire service, man. We're hitting cars and hurting people. You got to ingrain that in your driver trainer, whether it's for a tiller truck or an engine, ambulance, whichever. You got to make sure that you drive that home. Like, this is not your normal vehicle, right? We do want to get there fast. Like, Fire doubles in size every minute. People could be reported trapped or not. We don't know until we get there and we clear the house, but we got to get there first, right? If we're balling down the road, out of control, driving these vehicles, it's a recipe for disaster. And you got to start thinking, the older I get, like having a family, I don't want to put them in a jam. I want to be there for them, and I don't want to be responsible for taking the life of somebody else either, right? So definitely driving that home in the driver training process for whichever vehicle you're using is key.
Yeah, I think it's crazy just listening to you guys talk. I mean, I'm obviously learning a ton on this too, which is awesome. Just different perspectives, and still love the tower ladder more because I don't have to climb. So like that's obviously the best reason. I mean, you haven't sold me on the tillering yet, but I'm getting there. I'm warming up to the idea, I guess.
Hey, it's the best seat in the firehouse.
Amen.
But I think there's a lot of points there that I think some people, John, you mentioned it too, like don't be afraid of it. And I think that's a huge thing. I think if there is any fear of a tiller truck compared to any other vehicle when it comes to training or putting it in service, it's probably kind of deep seated in the fact that your driver training program's not there, right? And it's going to put your feet to the flame. You can't just put somebody behind the wheel. Hey, keys are in the ignition, let's go. There has to be some training behind it. And so that forces you in a position where you're training drivers, and it has to be, pretty good. Again, we start talking about dollar figures here. It's not an engine, right? It's not $1 million. We're $2 or $3 million, right? And, 3 to 5 years to replace it by the time you kind of get through that whole process, and everything kind of shakes out. So, I think that's a huge point that you guys have driven home very well. And I think I kind of want to just put an exclamation point behind that this is a training thing, but it's nothing. It's a great tool, the toolbox that you need to train on. It's just like if you got a new set of extrication equipment in the firehouse, that's the new latest and greatest. You got to go out and train on it. You got to make sure your people are ready to go and to use it. It's the same exact thing, just on a little bit bigger of a scale. One question you guys kind of mentioned about accidents. Oh, go ahead.
No, you're good. No, keep going. Sorry.
No, you're good. So, one question you guys mentioned about accidents. What is the thought process? And obviously Baltimore City is one, Coatesville is one, but anything outside of that too, any experiences of an accident, who kind of gets in trouble? How does that work out? Like, what does that look like with an accident with two drivers? And what does the investigation kind of look like with that too?
So,
All right,
don't hit anything, is what we were told.
I'm knock on wood. Coatesville's on year 4, and they have not had a reported accident in their tiller truck. So I don't even truthfully know what their policy is. But I want to keep that going. Props to all those guys. There was 24 guys that never driven or tiller a tiller truck. They've had that thing frontline in service, and they're going on 4 years plus with no accidents. So Baltimore, it could be brushing a mirror. It could be totaling the piece of fire apparatus. You and your partner, they don't care where the truck got hit, how it got hit. You and your partner are both going for a post-accident urine analysis to make sure that you are on no narcotics or drank any alcohol. It's frustrating, especially when the accident is clearly not the fault of the tiller truck. We had a guy just a few months ago. I was tillering. We didn't have headsets, unfortunately. It was a reserve, so I had to use the buzzer. But as we made a left turn, the guy shot up the bike, a literal shoulder/bike lane, and just clipped the front bumper of the tiller truck. I buzzed, tried to get him to stop, but the guy I think he was doing over 50 miles an hour when he passed us as we made a left. But we both had to go pee. It was clearly not our fault. The guy, passed us on the shoulder. But it's a whole thing. You're out of service for, Tim will tell you, it's probably 2, 3, 4 hours by the time you can't drive the truck back. They have to have somebody else drive it. You got to load you up, ship you downtown to take a pee test. It's a whole ordeal. It's super frustrating. Yeah, and I get it, I guess. But at the same time, there's plenty of accidents that they could clearly, deem obviously not our fault, and they still put us more or less through the ringer for it.
Why do you say I would tell you about it?
I mean,
Perfect.
you can back me up.
No, I did. No, I'm just joking. I have had to do it a couple times. One time where I was actually behind the wheel, driving, and then I think 2 times when I've been tillering. But same scenario for like the exposure and the amount of time we're out on the road. We do a pretty good job at avoiding accidents. But when we do go through it, it's the process is you're out of service. Safety officer has to come. Depending on how bad it is, the chief will show up. You need a police report. You got to show your driving permits. When all that's done and the paperwork's filled out, then they ship you to either our infirmary or the one hospital downtown where they do the post-urine analysis and the breathalyzer. And then you got to wait for the results for that. And hopefully everything comes back clean. I know there's guys that get hung up with prescriptions that they have, but then, they still show that they, things came back dirty. So now we got to go down to the shift commander and people are going home. But for the most part, we do a pretty good job at avoiding, accidents for the amount of time we're out on the street. But the process, it's a good process considering you want to make sure, you have the right to a safe work environment. You come in, whether you're driving, tillering, you're the officer, you're on the step, you have the right to a safe work environment. So, I don't foresee any issues when I have to go down and do those because I'm not showing up to work in a state where I can't drive. So we have a good process. I know we've been places before and we've talked to people and there's nothing for a post-accident, which is just also mind-boggling. Or there's a set number for damages before you actually send people to go. But I think for the most part, it is kind of a headache, but it's a pretty good policy, I think, to protect
that. Which is nice. They have it done, I guess you could say.
So how do they define fault? Do you guys both just get in trouble as drivers, or once do they do an investigation to figure out who's at fault, whether it was a civilian or each driver?
Yeah, I know the accidents I was involved in. The one guy, crazy for the city we work in, got out of the car and said, "I completely cut the fire truck off. I'm at fault," and he stayed around for the police and gave that statement, which was mind blowing for me. But another accident. Driving down, came through the intersection, car pulled off to the side. I guess he forgot that there was, or didn't realize that there was, 40 plus feet of fire truck still behind me, pulled back and hit us. Tillerman tried to buzz me, but I didn't hear it. We were like a block and a half from the box. So showed up on scene. Lo and behold, the rear compartment smashed in. They go to do the investigation and the guy's not even there anymore, or girl, whoever it was that hit us. So they try and do an investigation as best they can. We have drive cams to help us out. I know that's like a voodoo term for us with the drive cams, but it can be used to help us in a lot of accidents. And then obviously the statements that you give. So be careful what you say and what you do right during the investigation process.
So, but I guess most of the time they kind of do the thorough investigation and they figure out who's at fault, and it's not always both drivers. It's kind of, they try getting to the bottom of the accident to figure out which one would be charged or disciplined or whatever, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, unless it's like a blatant. Sorry, what was that?
Who gets charged if you're on a red light?
We don't know where we don't.
I stop at all stop signs and red lights.
Amen.
Yeah.
It's on video.
But if you get caught going through it and they can prove it, you're more than likely going home and getting a suspension because it's a critical safety fail, right? You're putting your crew in danger. You're also putting the public in danger.
Could be just a driver.
Okay.
Unfortunately, as far as policies, I feel like sometimes they do things differently depending on who's the investigating officer, but it should be just the driver. I mean, the driver has the gas, the driver has the brake. So,
all right. So, obviously in the other part of EBR, we do fleet evaluations, and at times once you look at a fleet in their district, a lot of what we end up advising them is, hey, you need, with the growth, the changes, you need to change from whatever type of ladder truck, which is normally a rear mount or a tower to some extent, but you don't have the ground ladders needed to provide you coverage. a tiller truck would really fit this community. So we are advising a fire company, sometimes volunteer, sometimes paid, in different aspects, but we're advising them that your next ladder truck purchase should be a tiller truck. So with that, how does obviously you guys have somewhat of a developed, even though it's a fluid and changing, training plan in Baltimore. How would you advise a new fire company who, similar to Coachville, but again, maybe they don't have, maybe it's a volunteer company we're advising that isn't going to have any consistency. How do you create that environment or that training program, or would you recommend would be the smart move for that? For a company who's going to change from a rear mount or a mid mount tower ladder to a tiller.
That's a great question. This is just my take on it, and see what you think, Tim. But being realistic, every fire company has a handful of heavy hitters. They just do. And we all know, and in our fire company, the chiefs, I think, have a pretty good idea of who their heavy hitters are, who their reliable drivers are, who their competent drivers are. So for a department like that, I think you get your heavy hitters, and you get those guys. It's going to be hard to train 30 people, right? But if I can take your 5 best apparatus drivers and I can make them tillermen, them tractor drivers, and they're all learning the same way. They're all learning the same teaching cues. They're all picking up the same exact program. Then those 5 heavy hitters, or whatever we came up with, could go back and teach the members that program. They would basically, pass it on and start working on building their approved driver list.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely.
Tim, you got
Yeah, I'd say definitely get the, like you said, the heavy hitters, the guys that, guys and girls there that, you can rely on. And also that, can retain that information and then give it back to the people, training.
Good teachers. Good point.
And I think a very big thing, and I think this with Coatesville, is you had the experience in the city, but it's not always necessarily there. So sometimes you got to look outside of just your department, right, or your county, and look across the country and see who can teach you to tiller or do a train the trainer for driving and tillering a tractor drawn aerial. Because trying to figure that piece of equipment out on your own and then trying to teach it to everybody is it's not going to work. You definitely need that experience, the experience of the road time, the exposure on fire grounds and setting up your aerial and how to set it up and the different types of, stabilization systems that they have, the overrides for it. Like, you need to be able to understand and operate that vehicle fluently without, we talk about it before with you guys talking about speccing vehicles, and it's crazy to me that some guys after 25, 30 years build a fire truck. Well, I wouldn't just build a house on my own unless I had the experience. I'm not an architect, right? So trying to get somebody else from the outside in to help you build your fire truck and help you on that end too is great. But there's definitely a lot more to it than just kind of, let's figure this out on our own. We're going to go buy a $2.5 million ladder truck and then put it in service. And to go with that, who around you has a tiller truck? Does anybody in the area have one? Is there a potential for you to buy one, get one on loan, and start that process well before the delivery time of your new piece? So that way you're ready when it comes and gets delivered.
I think that's a huge thing that we saw with our first podcast, getting that used tiller truck. And, John, I think you mentioned it earlier with, the damage and stuff. If you have a kind of junker, if you will, there, that, you can hit stuff with, and it's not going to be $3 million worth of damage or, an issue. And then the chiefs we talked to on the last podcast about mileage, right? Running that mileage up with all the training, and some of the, the kind of intake of the tiller truck, is huge. And I mentioned in the beginning, if it's a bad idea, you'll find out with a gently used or a cheaper tiller truck, if it's not going to work. So, I think that's good. Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of information. I want to give you guys a chance, Tim and John. We'll let John go first, but any parting words um, about tiller trucks, about training, about operations, anything involving a tiller truck that you would kind of pass along to a department that was looking at it, that has it, that's considering it in the future, anything like that. What do you got for them?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of end with this. When there was a guy in Coots, so he probably had 30 plus years of experience, a well-rounded fireman, had been out to fire department training network, constantly taking classes. That older guy that a lot of guys look up to because he's still so involved with training. And it was the first time he had ever tillered. And he left this with me. He said, I'm not saying by any means that I've done it all in the fire service, but I've never done this or done anything with this. And it was a whole new aspect, and it more or less revitalized him. Guys were excited to come to work. Guys were excited to learn how to tiller. Guys were excited to learn how to drive. It brought this energy that was lacking, and then so I took that energy and I really drove that energy into, okay, now you guys have this new tool. You're stoked about it. Let's put our truck in the game. Let's take pride in our spots. Let's be aggressive with our spots. I mean, we have this multi-million-dollar ladder truck. Let's get our aerial to the roof. Let's get our aerial to the balconies. Let's again put our truck in the game. So not only did it revitalize guys, but then guys got excited about not only driving, but then getting the truck there and positioning and operating. And it's shown on fire grounds. I mean, the guys are taking a lot of pride in these spots that we could have never before the tow truck pulled off. It would have been a 20-point turn. We would have had to try and back down some of these driveways. It would have been, extremely difficult in a straight truck, if even possible at all. And now the guys are just absolutely crushing it. And it's cool to see this new level of energy and pride in truck work, right? I mean, nothing is more disheartening than seeing a ladder truck parked a half block away and, the guys come down and the truck's completely out of the game. And so, yeah, I love it. I'm a big fan of it. I think, Tim will agree. They're the best ladder truck there is. Sorry, man. I know you're a tower guy, but
there's nothing more disappointing when you show up to the firehouse after being off for a couple of days and seeing a straight truck there. But that's just how I feel. And I've driven plenty of straight trucks throughout my time, and it is a whole different feeling being in a tiller truck and knowing what you can do. And yeah, I do agree with Johnny. Like, get your truck in the game, right? If you're around a city where we are, there's plenty of just single engine companies. Make sure you train with the engine companies around you to understand what you need, right? Hose stretches, ladders don't. We run short staffed compared to a lot of places in the country. We run 4. It might be a lot more than other places in the country, but we definitely need more people because, ladders, you got to get ladders in place. You got to get your turntable to where you need it in position. So make sure you work with those engine companies so they're not blocking you out. They're not taking the corner of the intersection and completely not allowing you to make that turn around them, right? Putting hose in the street when, hey, why don't you wait 10 seconds to let me get into the block and then you follow me down, right? So making sure you definitely work with the companies around you, the jurisdictions around you, right? There's definitely a staffing crisis around the entire country right now. So you're going to be starting to work with people that you never really worked with before. So make sure they understand what you have and then also like what you need when you get there, right? And it might be stuff you have to say on the radio. It might be stuff you might see face to face when you get to the fire ground. And the last thing I'll say with training, just for any type of training, not just with the tractor drawn aerial, make sure you document the training that you're doing. Making sure you keep track of the date that was a training, the amount of hours of training you did, the weather conditions, right? Because if you do end up in the jackpot and you end up in a courtroom because you got into an accident, you hurt somebody, you killed somebody, I'd rather have a file that's, this thick versus something that's this thick or just non-existent, right? So make sure you keep track of that. And I push that to the new driver trainers that we have that have been approved to tiller recently. Like, keep track of your time so you have something, right? A leg to stand on if something were to go wrong. Whether it's your fault or not, you just have something there that shows the training that you did.
I'll let Win talk next, see if he has any parting words. I know it's 3 truckies with an engine guy. There's some obviously battles between the tower and the tiller truck, but I mean, none of us would want to be on an engine. So let's just let him talk now before we finish on a high note.
No, I mean, I think that this is good. It broke down, aspects of a training system that's already developed for a department that has tillers, and there are plenty of departments in the United States that have tillers. So, I think this is good that it's good to hear, at least in Baltimore, that you go to the academy first, and then you come back and you get your like in-station, in-district training, and then back to the academy for final sign-off. I think that's missed in a lot of places where a lot of stuff is just done in-house. At least this way you get through a cone course, it's certified, and you see that, figure that out. And then again, you have your peers, essentially the people you're going to work with and who are, going to rely on your skills and capabilities. But they tell you that you're good to go before you go back out there.
Yeah,
I think that's good.
I think that's a valid point. I forgot to say that too, is making sure we go to the academy. If you're wherever you are in your department, your jurisdiction, making sure you have like the whole process laid out from start to finish, so your driver trainers know what they signed up for, but also to just keep it fair across the board, right? You don't have any issues with, my buddy did 5 hours of driver training and got approved to drive versus somebody who's 20 plus hours, 30 plus hours, right? And they're struggling to get approved. Now it's fair across the board. You know exactly what they did, and you all went through the same process to get there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and then so I think we worked on that a little bit. We talked about how it was done kind of in Coatesville with taking up 24 people and teaching them, from the basics of never driving one before, never really even seeing one in their department before, and developing that whole program. And then I think you guys brought up the good thing is that, and this is, I think, something that we say a lot is, if you don't know, get help. Bring somebody in from the outside. Don't think that this is something that you can just, do. I read a magazine. The first time I drove a tiller, which has only been once, I was a rookie in the fire station, and we still had them in Arlington. And they said, "Hey, we need you to drive this to Station 6. Have you ever done it before?" And I think I mentioned this last time. No, I've never done it before, but I just read a fire engineering article on how to keep your thumbs in the right position. So, you can't. That's not training. That's not the way It's a good piece of information to have, in a firehouse, or say, here's a new thing to read. But we almost put it in a creek that day, going in the back of Station 6. So
I would love to see that.
I think again, we talked about a couple different aspects of it. I think that, John was, I don't know if we can talk this long, and we say this all the time, but we didn't even get into operational training on this thing yet, and I think that's good. But I think the driving aspect of it, and Tim, firsthand with what you teach and accidents, and how important it is to really emphasize the driver training, especially a part where you have two drivers, two different minds.
You want to build that confidence.
Right. And I think you said it early on, and you were talking about it, but this is a really dynamic piece of fire apparatus. And it takes a lot more to kind of put this thing in service and keep it up and running than a pumper, or, and there's a lot that goes into being a pumper and a pumper driver. But at the same point, that cohesiveness between two different drivers here, the ability to understand what each person's doing and what's going to happen on the fire ground is a really big thing. And I think that you guys, although we just scratched the surface on this training thing, I think that we covered a lot of important topics on this whole tiller apparatus.
Yeah, we could spend days on this topic, and
for sure,
training. So
I think the big thing that we kind of covered very well, and it was kind of hidden in the background there. And I want to kind of bring it to the front. I did a little bit earlier, but the fear versus usefulness, like, a lot of what was said here today isn't groundbreaking, isn't new stuff necessarily for driver training, right? Like, drive carefully, don't drive too aggressively. You take the dynamic two driver thing out. Having a driver training plan, regardless of the rig you're driving, is important, right? There's a lot of things that are similar. So I think that, for some that are fearful of getting a tiller truck in, or the training, or that it's more, you're going from, let's say, 15 hours to 20 or 25 hours. That jump isn't that great necessarily, right? It is a dynamic vehicle. There is more to it. But again, it just goes back to having a driver training plan and getting the right people in the right spot. And so I think, I would rather take that dip in the pond instead of sitting back and having fear. And we went to somewhere that had a rear-mounted tower in a city like Baltimore City, and you ask the drivers, where do you park that thing? And they say the end of the block. Well, to me, staffing, fear, driver training, anything that would tell me that a tiller truck's not a good idea doesn't necessarily matter, because the need is there. If I want to be useful on the fire ground, if I want to get side alpha, if I want to be operationally efficient, I need a tiller truck to make that happen in that instance. So all the other stuff you got to work out, and that's done in meetings, and that's done with the politicians, and that's done with money and whatever else you need. That's all on the side there. This is an operational need that is existing in your first due or your area that needs to be considered. And that goes with compartmentation, ground ladder storage, all of that stuff. So if the need is there, this really needs to be looked at and considered, and kind of put that fear aside, and kind of just take the advice from people on the outside, people in your area, the experts, and kind of make that move. So I think that's kind of what I learned the most about today was, as much as it's a different thing, there's so many similarities that you bring somebody in and you do this the right way, it's very obtainable, very obtainable. So,
Hey, good news, Nick, is that city that used to park their truck at the end of the block, their tiller truck is almost done. It should be done at the end of the month. So no more parking at the end of the block.
Perfect.
Put them in the game.
Yeah. I thought I was being secretive with bringing that up, but I guess, yeah, that's true. You absolutely know who I'm talking about. But yeah, no, again, it's bringing people from the outside and identifying it and making moves, and they did all the right things. So, I mean, at the end of the day, they're the winners for it.
Yeah, if you're spending $1 million plus, I mean, with tiller trucks or tower ladders, $2.5-3 million now with some of these trucks. Like, don't be afraid to look into grouping in money for training with that, right? People get afraid of some of the numbers for training and getting people to come in from other parts of the country to train you, when that is like a fraction of a percent of the money that you would spend on the piece itself, right? So factor that in to, your vehicle during that process to get the right training on it, right? Don't be afraid of that either.
You're about 4 accidents away from paying for the training. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, if you can avoid that money in the aftermath of an accident just by getting out ahead of it, right? Be proactive in this service versus reactive like the fire department normally is. So be that leader in your department, right? Push for the training, push for the money from your politicians like you're talking about. And get them involved and show them why you need this and what this can do and how it's going to benefit them and the people in your jurisdiction.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, we've been at this for a little over an hour. Appreciate everybody listening in and hanging in there through the entire podcast. If you guys like this podcast, podcasts about fire trucks, check out the Apparatus Workshop. We have a whole bunch of other ones. And we have a part 1 to this tiller truck conversation that you should go check out for sure. Possibly more to come for tiller trucks as well. A lot of stuff to cover, and we definitely want to kind of get all that information out there for those departments. If you have any questions about today's podcast about tiller trucks, reach out to myself, Nick, Nick, Wilbur, WILBUR, at evr.solutions. And I will forward the questions along to Tim or John. Obviously, if it's involving tiller trucks and I can't answer it, and we'll get you and answer your question. If you guys have anything that you want to see in a podcast that we haven't covered so far, again, reach out, and we'll kind of get the experts in here and get it going. Thank you for the time. Be safe out there. Stay warm in this winter season, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.